The Senate is actually significantly in play for Republicans right now in a way that people weren't so sure it was going to be. Here are the election. Let me just give you the big nutshell here. If the election were held today, Republicans would win West Virginia, and that would bring a 50-50 Senate. And then the control of the Senate would come down to who controls the White House, because the vice president would break the votes, break the tie. Under the rules of the Senate and the practice and procedure of the Senate, if it's 50-50, then the committees are also 50-50, but the chairman is of the ranking party. It's hard to get anything done. The moment you get to 51 seats for either party, the majority of all the committees become controlled by the party in charge, and you don't have to worry about the tie-breaking vote. There are 28 Democrats right now not up for re-election in the Senate, and there are 38 Republicans not up for election right now because a third of the Senate is elected every 2 years. Each member serves for 6 years. The Senate is broken down into three classes, class 1, 2, and 3. I forget which class is up for re-election right now, but in any event, in the original Senate, the way it worked is you had a big election, or you had appointees. The states appointed the Senate. And in the original Senate, every state gets 2 senators, and they were assigned to classes, class 1, class 2, class 3. If I remember the history right, and please, there's no reason to send me a big narrative on this. I may get this wrong, but the basic gist of it was if you were in class 1, you served 6 years. If you were in class 2, you served 4 years. If you were in class 3, you served 2 years. And then you were appointed thereafter so that everyone got a 6-year term. And so a third of the Senate is up for election at any 2-year period. And every state will go at least once where it doesn't have any senators up for election. So I'm in Georgia. This year, Georgia has no Senate elections. If the election were held today, there would be a 50-50 Senate because Joe Manchin of West Virginia decided not to run for re-election. Joe Manchin decided not to run for re-election because he is the last statewide Democrat in that state, and it was becoming increasingly debatable as to whether or not he would actually even be able to win his reelection. So he decided it was time to retire. Jim Justice is the governor of West Virginia, and Governor Justice is going to win that Senate seat. And he's got all sorts of problems, all sorts of baggage, but he'll be a loyal Republican till he's carted off to jail or dies. Jon Tester is a populist Democrat from Montana. Jon Tester looks like he's going to lose in Montana. Tester is out of line with the bulk of the voters of Montana, who, by the way, the bulk of Montana voters, you should know, they tend to vote Republican for president and Republican in the state, but they tend to like having some Democratic representation. But this year, bridged too far. He supported boys and girls sports. He's been very open about supporting progressive judges. He's supported some gun control measures. Montana looks like they are tired of Jon Tester. That gives the GOP 51 votes. There has not been much hope in Ohio for Republicans. Bernie Moreno has been plagued with a lot of problems, including a messy divorce for his kid, some other accusations out there, but suddenly the tide is turning in Ohio. Republicans now believe that they might be able to pick up the Ohio Senate seat. If they do, that's 52 seats. So the Democrats are in a mad scramble for Florida and Texas. Democratic leaders are telling their party's donors that keeping Montana's Senate seat blue is a real challenge, but they're going to go on offense in Florida to retain their majority. They believe they have an opening in Florida because they believe Rick Scott is not super popular. Now, for the record, Rick Scott won the governor's race in Florida twice, has won the Senate in Florida ever since, but they somehow think that they can. They are also eyeing Texas, where Ted Cruz is only up by 3 points against Colin Allred. Florida and Texas are real, and they want the resources to go into them. This is good news for the GOP. Here's why it's good news. I don't actually believe that Rick Scott and Ted Cruz are in danger. Here's the problem for Ted Cruz. And listen, I like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a friend of mine. I've known Rafaela's dad. I like Ted. I like his staff. But Ted can be an abrasive personality for some people. Even some Republicans, they don't particularly like Ted. He comes across as full of himself. They don't like him. And it weighs him down to the polling. Also, just like in Arizona, you have a McCain Republican, and they don't like Carrie Lake. Notice no one's talking about her winning. She's not going to. And that is entirely the fault of the GOP and Donald Trump. In Texas, there are Bush Republicans who they don't really like Ted. They'll vote for Ted. They don't really like him. But when it comes up in the polling, they're like, he's not my guy. They wind up voting for him, typically, even if they don't like him or Trump. But that weighs on Ted Cruz. If a Republican, if Donald Trump gets elected president, Donald Trump would frankly be doing everyone a favor by putting Ted Cruz on the Supreme Court and freeing up a seat in Texas for a Republican who Texas voters tend to gel with a little better than Ted. I don't think they're in danger. Now, the dynamics here are kind of funny because the Democrats have been in Amelia Island, Florida, while the Republicans have been at Sea Island, Georgia, just up the road. We're talking an hour between the two, maybe hour and a half. And some of the donors could have jetted from one to the other if they wanted, not that they did. But John Tester's toast. Now, this all matters for some very practical reasons. Here's Chuck Schumer.
Vice President Harris.
Bang.
Vice President Harris endorsed a filibuster.
Just talking about, you can't hear the reporter, Vice President Harris wants to get rid of the
Something our
filibuster.
caucus will discuss in the next session of Congress. Yes. It's something our caucus will discuss. Yes.
It's something our caucus will discuss, getting rid of the filibuster. Now, I want to be real honest with you. I'm in the minority on this. Know when you're in the minority, even when you think you're right. I actually don't think the Democrats have the votes to get rid of the filibuster. Here's the Democrats thinking on the filibuster, and Kamala Harris says she is. And by the way, I should play you Joe Manchin here on this issue first.
Go to the Hill because we have some new information coming in, and Armani Raju is there, a key voice, I should say, not going to endorse Vice President Harris, Manu?
Yeah, that's right. That's Senator Joe Manchin, who had long been, of course, a moderate Democrat from West Virginia, recently became an independent, but someone who still caucuses with Democrats and had been signaling just a couple of weeks ago, told me that he was getting ready, getting closer to endorse Kamala Harris as he heard a lot of her proposals going forward. But now that she has said that she would gut the Senate filibuster rules in order to pass a measure to preserve abortion rights, Manchin tells us this morning that he will not endorse Harris for president. He is one of the staunchest supporters of the filibuster in the Senate. Manchin argues that it is essential to forcing bipartisan consensus and compromise in the Senate. It is in the minority of Democrats in particular who are pushing to gut this altogether because it would lower the threshold for advancing legislation from 60 votes to 51 if Kamala Harris had her way. But just moments ago, Manchin told our colleague Ted Barrett, he said, quote, shame on her, referring to Harris. He says that she knows the filibuster is the holy grail of democracy. And Manchin went on to say it's the only thing that keeps us talking and working together. If she gets rid of that, then this would be the House on steroids. And then Ted went on to ask him whether she would consider endorsing her. And he said, quote, that ain't going to happen. So he could have given her some effort as Harris is trying to move to the middle, guys. Perhaps she could have touted a Manchin endorsement, which seemed to be coming to her side. But now that she has said this, he says, no way, that is not going to happen, as she tries to promise her voters she can get abortion rights passed, and if she wins the presidency in November.
It's all about abortion for her. Here's what it is beyond abortion. The Democrats believe if they can get rid of the filibuster, they could pack the United States Supreme Court with additional justices who have life tenure. They can make Puerto Rico a state. They think that will give them 2 Senate seats. Be careful. Puerto Rico votes Republican. And they think they can get District of Columbia to be a state. I think the Supreme Court would say no, except they want to pack the Supreme Court with a bunch of justices who would say yes and then lock in their gains. That's the bigger picture here. You need to understand why the Senate is so important for the GOP. I actually don't think a majority of the Democrats want to go along with it unless they can lock in their gains. And the way they lock in their gains is first they pack the Supreme Court with several more justices who would ensure a progressive bent to the Supreme Court. Then they give the District of Columbia statehood, and you have those progressive justices say it's fine. Then you give Puerto Rico statehood, and they think that, well, maybe that'll balance out. Wink, wink, nod, nod. They'll vote Democrat. That's what they want to do. That's why the Republicans need to pick up the Senate to preserve the filibuster. The filibuster actually, as Joe Manchin says, does actually force the Senate to not be like the House. It slows everything down, which is good. And it forces the senators to work together to try to get 60 votes instead of towing a party line with 51. Now, the fact that the Democrats are telling people put money into Texas and Florida is actually bad for the Democrats, because I don't actually think that the Democrats in Texas or Florida can mount a ground game to overcome the Republicans who have been surging in voter registration in both states. I don't think they can, but it will deprive states like Ohio of resources. And suddenly Bernie Moreno is putting Ohio in play. Ohio is now the only undecided state right now. Pennsylvania and Dave McCormick, it looks like the Democrats can pick that up, although McCormick is beginning to close in the polling there. Early voting has started, and McCormick is beginning to close in with Bob Casey. Nevada, unfortunately, Sam Brown is a great candidate, but doesn't seem to be closing the deal there. Arizona, I mean, Donald Trump and the Republicans should blame themselves for that. Trump's support for Kari Lake, she's a terrible candidate. She's just been ruined there. And you're going to get a very progressive Democrat taking that seat when any other Republican probably could have won it. But right now, it looks like the GOP could pick up the Senate. The problem is the House. It looks like the Republicans aren't even fundraising good enough to keep the House. Maybe they can. They're begging Donald Trump to do a fundraiser. And by the way, side note here, I refuse to encourage people to give money to House candidates these days, as much as I want the GOP to save the House. But if you give them money, you're going to get spam messages, text messages for the rest of your life, and you're punishing yourself by giving money to the GOP in the House. It's just a shame to see. But right now, the Senate is on the line. The Republicans have a great shot at taking the Senate, and they may actually be able to pick up the Ohio seat as well, which would give them 52 seats in the U.S. Senate.